fact, if you're really attuned to this, you will notice that sometimes when you have a feeling, an emotion, a reaction, an impulse, the first place to stir is down here, and then it just radiates almost instantly throughout the rest of the body. So that being the case, the mind then, the thinking mind, the conscious mind, what's called the sixth consciousness, will then just begin to babble and chatter and go crazy because it's so used to running out all over the place. When you ask it to just come down and drop down to the well and be quiet, it goes, what? No way. This is really boring. And it goes through this whole thing. It rebels. And that's why it's left. And that's where it really kicks into high gear. I say, okay, you're going to deny me things with my eyes, ears, nose, tongue. I'm going to go to the video store within, and I'm just going to start channel surfing on the consciousness. And that's what it does. And that's what you think is like, whoa, I'm sitting here in quiet meditation. Wow. And the mind is going on. It's going yesterday. It's going tomorrow. It's kind of playing around with here and now. Who coughed? What was the band playing? Blah, 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 blah. It's just running all over. And then it starts having memories and reflections, thoughts, fantasies. What else goes on in your mind? Or what else do you think goes on in other people's mind? Let me put it that way. As they're sitting here in this nice 45 minutes of quietude.
Plans, shopping lists.
Plans, shopping lists, that's very good. Anything else? Come on. This is, huh?
Another could, would, should. Kind of something I wish I could have done.
Oh, things I wish I would have done. That's very good. What's the opposite of that?
Regrets.
Things I wish I hadn't done. Right, so you get two sides of that. What else goes through? Worries. Wow, that's a good one. And once you get through those 10, you're on, right? Just 10 worries and you're done? No, 10 worries lead to 10,000. Right? They just multiply. So fears. Conversations. You had? There we go. So conversations past, present, and future. Conversations you wish you had had or did have. Conversations you hope to have or hope to avoid. And in the present, conversations, that are sort of muddling around and going blah, 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 right? Okay. Parents, relatives, friends, lovers, enemies. All those will start to come up at this point. As you get those quieter and quieter, then it'll go back even deeper into the recesses. What you did as, well, let's start here. What you did before you got married, what you did as a graduate, what you did as an undergraduate, what you did in elementary, secondary, middle school. Middle school is a really fertile ground for calling up all kinds of things. What you did in kindergarten, what you did in the earliest stages of your memory, even when you get really focused and whatnot and you try to quiet it, it will squeeze in to almost what you think is precognitive memories, memories you didn't think were possible to draw up. First memory, some people go back into the womb. The Buddha in this stage of going through his meditation went into the womb and into his previous life. And then, it wasn't enough, previous lives. So the faculty of the mind to know this kind of stuff is there, it's innate. And part of the process of the meditation is just letting that process take itself through. Not attaching to any of these things as they come up, not fishing for them and seeking them, but at the same time, just watching them rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall. An immense amount of patience required here. Because sometimes incredibly blissful experiences will arise, and you'll think, I've arrived, I'm here. And then the opposite will arrive. bad memories, things you feel so remorseful and ashamed about you think you can't go on, or fears arise that you feel as if I'm going to sink into an emptiness and lose my mind, and so you start to panic. You just calmly watch the rise and fall of these conditioned phenomena, and eventually, because they have no energy of their own except what you give to them in moving to unite and attach to them, they just fall away, just like snowflakes hitting a fire. Poosh, 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 and then it gets quiet, quiet, quiet. Now, the mental thing that you're doing here is when the mind wanders, the first thing the teachings talk about, bring your attention back to here again. Because normally when that happens, your mind and your body energy has gone up. So if you bring it back, almost naturally, the internal yakking will quiet. Now, if that doesn't work, then you use some kind of holding device, okay, sometimes called meditation topics. A holding device, in a sense, it's like a leash, if you want to think about it that way. Put the leash on the mind, like a doggy, okay? You keep it from running away. That's what this meditation thing is. So you can do a recitation. You can recite the Buddha's name as a holding device for the mind. And what you do is you say, Omi Tofo, 4 characters, or Namo Omi Tofo, very slowly, and you lose yourself completely in that recitation, as if you were just hanging on, uniting with each sound, each syllable, and nothing else was going on, almost to the point where it's seemingly silly because all you're doing is immersing yourself into that sound. But that effectively, psychoactively, serves as a leash to keep the mind from going someplace else. And that's why this device is called using fire to fight fire, or using poison to fight poison. Fire and poison are not in themselves intrinsically useful, but what they do is they put out a bigger fire, or you use a poison to counteract a bigger poison. They are not the ends in themselves. So don't think, oh, I've got a special meditation technique or topic, and it's holy and it's sacred, and No, it's just a clever device to hold or leash the mind to keep it from running away momentarily. And because when the mind is not allowed to run away, it neither can grasp onto these states nor repress them, and simply is in the background watching these things come and go because it's attending. And these things just start to fall away, these states fall away by themselves. So, when you come back, when your mind moves out, you'll notice that you drop this recitation. Let's just call it either Guanyin Pusa, Namo Guan Shiryin Pusa, or Omi Tofo, or Namo Omi Tofo, or another one is Om Mani Padme Hum. Okay, let's just say 3 leashes tonight. That's enough. Take your pick, which leash you like. One's purple, one's red, and one's yellow. No bells and whistles on them, just straight leashes. Whatever one you use, the effectiveness is not in which one. Now, if I said, look, there's a 4th one that's really effective, but I won't give it to you, it's really special, but with a certain inducement, with a certain credit card thing, I might pay. No, don't get tricked. It doesn't matter what they are. The effectiveness is in your application of your mindfulness on it, not in the thing itself. So remember, the effectiveness is in the mind, not in the material thing that you're using. So the mind turns the Dharma wheel. The Dharma wheel doesn't turn the mind. So Om Mani Padme Hum, Namo Guan Shiryin Pusa, Omi Tofo, all 3 are equally effective if you use them. If you don't use them, none of them are magical or effective. It's that simple. A drill is only a drill if you drill with it. If it doesn't drill, it's useless. It's just sitting there. So, whichever one you use, bring your concentration inward. You can recite it mentally. You don't have to mouth it. Now, you notice there's meditation retreats where they do use those names. Namo Guan Shiryin Pusa, Namo Omi Tofo, and another you can use. Earth Door Bodhisattva, same technique. And people walk and recite. Namo Guan Shiryin Pusa, Namo, and they do this, and then they sit and they recite, and then they sit in silence for a half an hour or so, and recite internally. Then they get up and do it again. That's a combination of mindfulness practice that includes the sitting meditation, but also the movement. So you can see how this is done, and you do that for 7 days. And gradually through the walking, standing, sitting, using that technique, it's like water cutting through a groove. Gradually, it cuts a little deeper and a little deeper each time, and the layers of your mind, your consciousness start to open up through the penetrating power of that recitation. Because it's stilling the discursive mind from running away. That's all that's going on. So this is basically the technique. Now, how to use it? Use it in a very calm and even and measured way, like the breathing. Now remember, what were the ways not to breathe? This is a test. Okay, anybody remember?
Macho forced.
Macho forced. That seems to be the one that everybody recalls. So you don't want to go, Kuan Yin! Okay, don't do that. What's the other one? Uneven. So uneven would be the inhale and exhale. So it's Namo Amitofu, Namo Amitofu. No. And then the other one is the broken one, right? Namo Amitofu. Right, okay? So what you have is the image of a cellist or a violinist. Any of you ever watch? When they're trying to hold a long note, how do you do it? Now, we're in the horn section. Those of you who have played horns, you have to hold a long note that's longer than the breath. You stagger breathe, it's called. So if you have 3 horns, everybody takes a breath at a different time, and you very softly come in and exit. So it seems like the whole horn section is holding this note ad infinitum. It's a trick. But in the stringed instrument, if you're playing, you have to hold it. You get a technique where going out and back is so smooth that it's not but it's because of the movement of the bow on the wrist. There's this kind of movement at the end where it doesn't stop. So your breathing should be in that way. Even, unbroken, not forced. And I would say keep it kind of slow. Not too fast, but not so. So if you go, there's no merit, there's no merit in speed. So if you say it faster, you won't awaken faster. Okay? It's like the person next to you going, Om Tofu, Om Tofu. I'll beat him. Om Tofu, Om Tofu, Om Tofu. No, it doesn't work that way. You just get hyped up and frantic. So if you go too fast, you'll get excited and you'll get over agitated, and then you'll start to get nervous and anxious and uncomfortably sitting. On the other hand, if you go too slowly, what happens? You let everybody get enlightened before you like a bodhisattva.
Oxygen deprivation.
Oxygen deprivation, or more torpor. You start to go into the zone called sleep. Okay? So you're going, Nam Mo Wah, and you're out. And you think you're in samadhi until the proctor comes up and whacks you with a stick and goes, what are you doing? I was in samadhi. No, you were sleeping. You were actually snoring. I'm serious. You get in chan halls and people are snoring. And they think they're reciting their mantra. And they think they're in the Pure Land. And they're just asleep. Okay, so not too fast, not too slow. Find the middle way for you. And then keep it regular. If you find it speeding up, it usually means your mind's gone off, racing. If you find it slowing down, you'll find that you've actually sunk into a dull emptiness. So you keep a steady, even keel. If your eyes don't close and you do this correctly, you will have an energy that's not too quick and not too slow. It's really focused. One other technique I'll just say to you tonight that you can do if you want to move this along a little further is you can layer the sound internally over your breathing. So let's have Om Mani Padme Om. 6 characters, right? Om, 6 sounds, 6 syllables. Om Mani Padme Om. So, as you're sitting here and you relax and get centered, as you inhale, you can layer the sound of the Om in your recitation over the breath. Ma is the exhale. Inhale, ni. Remember, it's all coming from here. Pod. Inhale, me. Exhale, and then repeat again. And so you have, in a sense, a little wheel of sound turning repetitively, and it's corresponding, layered. Remember, I was saying layered over the breath, not directing the breath, but just gently layered on top of the breath. So as the breath goes in, you just let it ride in on it. As the breath goes out, you let it ride out with the breath. Still, you're bringing it all down to here. So that's a little more, I won't say advanced, it's just a little more integral in the sense that you will then match the breathing and the internal in a rhythm. They're kind of in harmony. Make sense? So that isn't to say there's all kinds. Some people do counting the breath. Some people do different recitations. Some people will do the entire Great Compassion Mantra as a meditation centering device. You all know some of you know the Great Compassion Mantra? A mantra is a series of syllables and sounds that is usually memorized, and Om is the simplest of mantras. It's just one sound. And then you have the Dabe Jo, which is a series of sounds in a row. And it takes, about a minute and a half to recite if you're really moving along. And then there's the Shurangama mantra, which is humongous. It's like the LA phone book. And it's really long and takes about 10 or 15 minutes to read. And some people, minds are so wild that they feel that they have to do a mantra of some length and keep it going to hold the mind steady. They require a big, powerful leash, a chain. These bicycle things you secure your bike with? We used to do, when I was a kid, we'd just do a rope. And because you were a scout, you knew knots that others couldn't tie. And so if somebody stole your bike, it was a scout. No. Okay. But, now they have these devices that are really heavy duty, almost weigh as much as the bike to secure the bike from being stolen. So the light bike that you get is defeated by the props of the lock you're carrying. But if you need something like that, you can do a mantra. You can do it. If you want to really go up, do the Shurangama mantra and continue. If you're really got a busy, active mind, you're all very bright here, I can tell, then do them all together. Whatever it takes. There's no more effectiveness. But sometimes just a simple recitation, almost like a childlike losing yourself in it, is sufficient. It'll work unto itself. You don't have to up it or increase. And don't be lured into thinking that there's some special powerful thing that you go to some teacher, the standard cartoon, you climb up the mountain and the teacher's sitting there on the top of the plateau and gives you the secret. Okay? There's no secret. The secret is just your sincerity and how you recite. Okay? Any questions on that? Go ahead.
You started off talking about how the eyes regard the nose, regards the mouth, the heart, and what was the last step of that?
The eyes regard, meaning look off the nose regards the mouth, and the mouth regards the heart.
And the heart's the end.
No, the heart is this.
Or the heart's
Right, so I make sure we're not talking about here, because that will that'll stir up your hypertension. So what you'll notice this, wherever you put your attention, you'll have a corresponding physiological effect. By bringing it down here to the hub, you have just brought all your energy into the furnace of circulation. And you will naturally feel calm. Your circulation will feel very at ease. Your complexion and everything will just feel nicely cultivated. It's a very calm-centered thing. Good athletes move from here. And part of training good athletes is to train them in these practices. I had friends who were Olympic athletes and, increased their performance by doing contemplations that through yoga and meditation, brought their attention down here. So, it has some benefits in a physiological sense. That's not why we do it, but I'm just saying, and gymnasts, and also singers and musicians learn to bring their energy and focus, and actors too. So if you move from here, things get a lot easier. It's really, really kind of interesting that this center is in many ways, and also for your health and well-being. When you're in pain or you're going through a difficult surgical procedure or something like this, it will help to bring your attention and mindfulness down here with your breath. It's quite interesting how that works. Because you're relaxing, and by relaxing, you're then taking the tension and constriction out of your capillaries and your the flow of your neurotransmitters and so forth. Yes?
So, bringing your attention down to the hub, are you saying the mantras with an attention down here, or doesn't the mantra take you back up to the head?
This is the sort of paradox. You want to be reciting from down here where your mind is. So you're reciting with a mantra. So once your attention is down here, some people actually visualize a little wheel, a mantra wheel turning down here. You know, it's the Dharma wheel going round and round. It's just this little wheel, like a little water wheel. Omi topo, omi topo, omi topo. And it's quite liberating not to be up here. It's quite liberating. You feel vulnerable, but heck, what's to worry about here? So you can just be vulnerable and let it come down there. Interestingly, also it increases your awareness. Your awareness is actually heightened and more responsive when you're relaxed and coming from here than if you're trying to anticipate from here, which is one of the reasons athletes and martial artists use this technique, because when you're sparring in martial arts, if you're moving from up here, you're actually slower. You're anticipating, projecting, and whatnot. If you just center, which is called wushin, the no mind, if you center here, you're responding like a mirror to the movement. So when your opponent moves, there's no mediated thought. You're immediately just responding from that relaxed open space. So, you know, this is why sometimes this Chan or Zen is associated with martial arts and so forth. But, good. Okay, anything else? Okay, let me just say a bit more about this, because I don't want to give you the impression that this is a ultimate practice. There's lots of different practices: reciting the Buddha's name, bowing, memorization, recitation, and so forth. Meditation is only one. Actually, they're all equal in the end. They're all just expedients. But when I say bring your attention down here, do not think that this is the mind. Okay? That this is the locus of the mind, that I'm bringing my attention to my mind. It's not called the mind. This is just a focal point that happens to be a pretty good observation point, or a pretty good centering point from which to observe the workings of the mind. But it is not the mind itself. You understand what I'm saying? So don't think this is the mind, this is the locus of the mind, because the mind has no location. Now we're getting a little tricky. That's why I want to say this tonight. What I'm teaching you here, what was taught to me in terms of using this mental cultivation, is only provisional cultivation. It's not the direct, real cultivation. It's just a provisional. This is just a training device, like training wheels on a bicycle. But just because you can ride on the bicycle with the training wheels doesn't mean you've mastered the bicycle. You're just using this to get your muscles in gear, get to feel the rhythm of it. Eventually you raise the training wheels up a little bit so that you still, if you tip, it'll catch, but the goal is to ride without the training wheels. So calming the mind, or dhyana, or stilling the thoughts, this goal is just a technique to open up the mind to its full uses. So you're calming the mind, you're stilling the mind, you're dhyana, only because you want the mind to be able to stop running all over the place, and in its calmness begin to return to this full working capacity that it has. So the sitting meditation, don't get attached to it. It's merely a kind of expedient practice to correct an over exertion of the mind running out. Once the mind is stilled and you start to get a flavor of its uses and its function, then the training wheels can start to come off and you can start to really move. So the calming, the stilling, the settling, these are all words to be used for this. The one I like is equanimity. And so the mind is in balance. It's responding appropriately to things as they are. It's not getting overexcited, and it's not, running away, and so on and so forth. all of this comes down to a sequence where you have Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. This is called the 3 non-outflow studies. So the Shila is the purifying, the purity, okay? The Samadhi is the stilling of the mind, and the Prajna is the insight, or the seeing, if you want to use that, seeing, S-E-E-I-N-G, that occurs naturally when these are working correctly. So this is kind of the heart of the meditation school, is bringing these 3 into function. When these 3, the purity, the Shila, and the equanimity are working, then the mind naturally begins to see things as they really are, and it expands. Yes? So purity, in the basic sense, and I'll go into this tonight, purity in one sense means what you do with your body, mouth, and mind is not harming others. It's not harming you. It's not harming others. It's not deceptive. It's not malicious. It's not unhealthy. It's ahimsa, meaning non-harming. So purity also means that you're not running out. You're not admixing. You're not mixing your energy with things that are forming attachments and moving you away from your real being, your real center, because you're grabbing attachment. Remember the purity of stillness text we used last time? It's like when your thoughts are disturbed, you start to go out and think, I'm lacking, I don't have it. And that is the admixing. And you can't connect with any of those things because they're dreams, illusion, bubble, shadow. So there's ultimately, where are you going to set up and say, this is me and mine, because I got this, because it slips through your fingers and so on and so forth. So purity means finding a deep contentment in your own being that knows I'm okay, enough, sufficient. I don't have to seek outside wildly. I'm okay just as I am. And that the impurity, if you want to use that word, is not some moral judgmental thing as much as it is as getting confused and then running off your center and then getting mixed up, and it's actually mixing, confusing, and whatnot. And then to find it again, you have to unmix. You have to disentangle. So that's what purity is about. And from that basis, if you know, for example, when the patriarchy and enlightened, they say, how unexpected, my essential nature is pure, in and of itself. How unexpected, it's whole and complete and lacks nothing. How, and they go through a series, but it's really interesting, and these are all joyous, liberating statements describing what happens when they discover, I'm okay, I got it all within. I just have to stay there, and everything just opens naturally. So, while this is presented as a sequence, first you have the purity, the sila, then that leads to the concentration or equanimity, and then comes the insight. In fact, they are non-dual. They happen simultaneously. So however much you don't move from that center, immediately you have focus and awareness. Your mind is not scattered, and immediately your perception is more clear and insightful. So it's simultaneously. It's not necessarily a sequence. And this is the one meaning of bu'ar, non-dual. You've all heard that expression. The Buddha, in the Sixth Patriarch Sutra, the Platform Sutra, he says, Fo fa shi bu'ar fa. So the Buddha Dharma is a non-dual Dharma. The Dharma of the Buddha is a non-dual Dharma. So that concentration, meditation, insight is one single fabric, one single thing. Okay. So the mind then is not some entity or organ, which a lot of people ask, well, where is the mind? And they think that's where they go with this. The mind is here. It's not that. It's actually a dynamic interaction functioning. The word I think might work here from science now. I was thinking neuroscience. They talk about a distributed property. You all know that expression? A distributed property or phenomena. It means they'll say memory or language functioning is not a localized brain thing. You can go and say, here it occurs in the brain. It's right in this quadrant right here, and when you talk, that quadrant lights up. But they actually say it's a distributed property because all sorts of things are happening throughout the brain, the system, and including other organs. So when you have fear, it's a distributed property. It's not just here, but it's throughout. And so memory, learning, cognition are distributed properties. The brain functions. That's why it's so hard to get a handle on it. And even when they look at these MRIs, you're not just seeing one thing light up, you're seeing, and they're not just lighting up like Bach in many, but they're going bum, 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 bum. I don't know, like these Christmas tree lights, you ever see the ones that come on and off, the little ones? That's how the brain works. It's distributed. Consciousness is a distributed property. It's not in one location. So if you think about it this way, when you're cultivating the mind, you're cultivating your consciousness as it's distributed over all kinds of wherever you distributed it. Sight, sound, smells, taste, it's distributed there. It's distributed into memories, dreams, reflections. It's intertwined with the 10,000 things. That's where it is. It's just out there mixing all the time. Even when you turn off your devices, your mind is still plugged in. Even when you go to sleep, your mind is still plugged in and mixing with the 10,000 things. Okay? So mind cultivation, this meditation we're talking about, isn't just this. That's only giving you a platform to be able to observe this consciousness as it's going out all over the place. And so what you're doing is you're disentangling your consciousness from this matrix that you've sent it out to. You're disentangling, you're letting it come back from its confusion, delusion. The one that I like, the Chinese metaphor, is you bring it back from the dust. So if you think about the dust or the sand, that your consciousness is just in a dust storm, just mixing, and every wave that comes along takes further, and it's just a cloud of dust. You bring it back, you turn your back on the dust to reunite with the clear, calm purity of the mind that is centered again. So the fragmented awareness that's happened to our consciousness is like a light that just scatters in this direction. The laser-like function of bringing the light back then allows you to really penetrate, which is one of the things the meditation is doing. So, if you follow this, if you follow the logic of this, you're moving through stages where your purity, if we talk about it that way, although it's essential to stillness, it's also the same as stillness. But this is where I go a little further, and the texts do too. We have to get into this. People say, I am cultivating purity because I took the precepts. Do you know what it means to take the precepts? What does it mean to take the precepts? It happens usually when people do the refuge ceremony, when they take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and then they take the precepts. Okay, anybody here taken the precepts? Okay, what does it mean to take the precepts?
There's the 5 precepts.
Okay.
Which is no harming or no killing,
Mm-hmm.
no lying, no sexual misconduct, no stealing, and no taking intoxicants.
Okay. What does that mean, though, when you take them? You take them home and you put them in a drawer? Or?
Like, no drinking. And no drugs.
Okay, so most people think it's kind of like a one-time thing. And they go, I got the precepts. I took them. And then they just go out and they think like they got the magic precepts. And actually, taking the precepts is just the most initial form of making your mind committing to returning to something. So you have to become the precepts after you take them. Whoa. In other words, you take them as a kind of device you're using, but after a while, they become so internalized and you get the rewards from holding them that you actually transform and become them, and you don't have to think about holding them or taking anymore, because your natural tendency is to stay pure. So they're actually guides to get you back to that initial natural feeling. Once you're there and you taste that, it's like, wow, I don't want to leave this. You don't have to hold the precepts anymore. Because even the feeling of moving out of that space of centered clarity is so, non-attractive You don't have to think, oh, I really have to not kill here. Well, because your conscience is so rarefied, even the thought that leads to killing, the anger and the hatred precedes it, is already too much for you, much less the act of following through. So this is becoming the precepts. And by becoming the precepts, you're actually not taking on a kind of altered identity. You're actually truing yourself to your natural identity, your natural state. That's why the sixth patriarch says, when your mind is regulated and subdued and returned in this way, you don't have to think about holding the rules, the precepts. This is true precepting. So that's where this school is going with this. Now, what happens is, there's a really great line. You all know the poet Robert Frost? Okay. You should read him. He's pretty cool. I could tell many stories about Robert Frost, but one person asked him once in the 60s, some of you know the 60s, I'm talking about the 1960s. In the 1960s, there's some people in this room who were experimenting with expansion of consciousness and freedom before they encountered Dharma. So I won't go into any details here. So he was at some hippie gathering in Vermont, and one of the people there said, "Hey, Frost, what's freedom? What's freedom? What's real freedom?" And he quickly, without even thinking, he says, "To me, freedom means riding easy in light harness." Now, of course, he's coming from an agricultural background, so he says, it's riding easy in light harness. The meaning is, when you have a horse that has a relationship with you and it's been trained and subdued, you can put on the harness just very lightly, and you're just riding easy, and all you have to do is sometimes just lean your hand a little bit, and the horse just naturally goes that way. You don't have to have a tight harness where you're doing this. The image I have was when I was in Burma. I guess I can call it Burma. I don't like Myanmar. It sounds like it's out of the trilogy The Rings. Like, what's the place in the trilogy? It's Mordor, Miramar. So I like Burma. Burma's more lilting. I was in Burma. I was sitting on one of these stupas, and the sun was going down, and I could hear this clunkety, 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 clunkety. And I looked down, and the farmers were coming back from their fields, and they have a little cart with these big wooden wheels, and it's pulled by an ox. And the roads are so back and forth, back and forth. There's little grooves in the road where these wheels just kind of set in. And the farmer is just sitting there. He's got the harness in his hands, and it's attached to the ox, but he's just sitting there like nodding out. Now, they smoke these funny cigarettes that they roll. I mean, these are humongous things, so it's hanging out of the side of his mouth and nodding like this, days in, and the ox is just going home, riding easy and light harness. And to me, this is like when you're tamed and subdued, you can move through life like that. You don't have to have this whip and the tight harness and go here, go there, and you're kind of repressive and uptight about your energy. Once you figure out the road, you kind of know, and you've tasted that freedom, you relax. And so there's the precepts, when they hold themselves in this way, is the beginning of it becoming the precepts. So now, the other thing that's important here, and I probably won't finish tonight, but I've got some quotes, and we'll get into this a little bit next week. Therefore, when you're doing this practice, the meditation practice, which is just the beginning of the big return of bringing your consciousness back to its root, going back to the root, returning to the source, finding your original mind. The one metaphor I like from the Chan school is you're going home to the wind and light of your original ground or your homeland. I like that image. When you grow up someplace, there's a wind and a light, there's a feeling, and sometimes a fragrance. When I'm back at my farm, Wisconsin, though, I associate the light of the morning and the afternoon, and I know that. And I know the wind and what the wind brings. But there's another thing that I associate. It's just before it rains and the lightning and thunder begin. There's a smell that comes off the earth that's unlike any place else. And when I'm there, I can sit with my eyes closed and I say, I know exactly where I am right now. And it's a smell of the earth that is unique to an area. And then when the rain actually comes, it's just the smell just bursts forward, but it's right there before the ring. That's called a metaphor for the original ground. And so when you're really cultivating, you start to feel that you're in that space all the time. You're in your homeland. So this is called the return or the going home of the meditation practice. I'll only hint at this tonight. Because we've been going out so much, scattered, linking in, that's what feels natural to us. In other words, our unnatural starts to feel natural because we have habituated, and I'm going to use that term because it's a term of cultivation. And so when we reverse and go back, it doesn't feel natural. There's a kind of discomfort and unsettledness about it, even a kind of murkiness. Because, and how long we've been away is how long that's going to feel unnatural and murky to us. So the way of going out is one we know. And the problem with going out is the further you go out, the further away from that you move. And so the return is elongated. It's made longer by the wilder you've let your consciousness roam. Just like if you let the field overgrow, one season you can do something. 3 seasons, you can't even find the field anymore, where I come from. And the pulling of the weeds is much, much more difficult. Moreover, if you let it go too long, the rocks start to come up again. And so you have to get the rocks out before you can get the weeds out. So if you cultivate it seasonally, you don't have this problem. So the longer you let it go to seed, the harder it is. Now, when the mind goes out in this way, when it leaves that thinking it needs something, it gets a little bit of a fix with one of the things you're after. There's a kind of high that comes, this momentary, I got something. But then what quickly happens is because you can't hold it, no matter what it is, it could be a thing, it could be a feeling experience, it could be a relationship, whatever it is that you grab, quickly plateaus. And then it's over. And then there's a slight letdown. And then what happens, the mind quickly goes out a little further and raises the ante a little. And this is called hedonic adaptation. It's a psychological term, but it's a useful one. In other words, the hedon, the enjoy, pleasure part of it, neutralizes after an indulgence. And so the indulgence has to be increased a little bit. You adapt. In other words, you reach a copacetic neutral zone because experience relies on contrast. And so once you've had that first bite, let's say your first bite of food, the second and third isn't as big of a rush anymore. By the time you're into it 8 or 9 bites, you could be eating cardboard and you wouldn't know it because the initial burst is over. So the next meal, if you have that same spice and flavor and it's not quite, so you add a little more. This works, for example, in drug addiction. This is how drug addiction pyramids up. All sensory experience follows the hedonic adaptation model. So we plateau, we adapt. The example they give is, this is really great. One of the psychologists that's working on this is a really brilliant woman psychologist, and she was watching her family go through hedonic adaptation. So the kids would get their toys, and within a week of getting them, the toys would just be sitting there unattended. They were boring. They needed to have new toys. And she would say to them, "You'll adapt." And they wouldn't know what she was talking about. So they get the new toys, and they'd like the excitement, and then within 4 or 5 days, those toys would be passed on. So then her husband comes in and says, "You know, we got that 32-inch screen. I want the 52-inch. And she says, "You'll adapt." And he goes, "I hate it that you're a psychologist." But it's true. Once he gets the 52-inch, in X amount of time, it's not big enough. So I've watched this. If you go to these big end stores, you'll see, you know, when the 50s and 60s television came out, they were much bigger than this. And now you can get a wall. You can get a TV this size. But it's still never going to be enough because hedonic adaptation requires more and more. And that's where the saying in Buddhism comes that the mind of this greed or wanting is like a bottomless pit. The more you put in, you can never fill it because it just sinks into this dark hole. Yeah.
So, but that's not necessarily the natural experience of a sensory state. It's a sensory state without consciousness or without, right? I mean, we're sensorial beings. And
Right.
there is a way to...
This I'm describing is what the classic of purity stillness describes as the overexcited, overstimulated franticness that's driven the normal, this doesn't mean you don't have sensory. This is, we'll go into this. It doesn't mean you then numb and deny the senses, because that's going to the other extreme, which interestingly only increases than the longing for them. So again, people that say, I'm going to end this desire, and they repress it, actually end up inflaming it. So it's like, yeah, it's very tricky how you work with this. Seeing through it and getting it balanced, what's called the middle way, what we might call sustainability, if you wanted to use it in a larger sense. Not too much, not too little, what's appropriate. Once you get there, the senses are still working very actively, but they're not being flooded or repressed. Moreover, there is a contentment that comes from knowing when to stop and knowing enough that then leads to a feeling of real joy and liberation, as opposed to a nervous longing and wanting more. So that's one of the markers, is when you're in that state where you have enough, it's not like your senses are totally appropriate, totally balanced, and you know when to stop. So it's really, anyhow, that mechanism of constantly going out, and by the way, what they found now, and as they go into this, hedonic expectation is even greater than hedonic enjoyment. No, this is really funny. I mean, and then there's hedonic adaptation. So you have hedonic expectation, which is the anticipation of getting the thing. See, a lot of times when you're sitting in meditation, it's hedonic expectation. When we're done tonight, we're going to go out for one of those pizzas. Whoa. And you're thinking about it, and your mouth is watering, and that pizza is starting to become like out of this world. It's a Tushita heaven pizza. It's like, whoa, And the longer you sit, the more that pizza becomes an incredible object of desire. You'd rather have that pizza than have your girlfriend or boyfriend, anything, when you're focused on this is kind of a samadhi. And so, or for me, when it was like, I really like jiaozi. So when we're sitting in the meditation hall and they bring the offering in just before the meal, and they bring in jiaozi that day, then my nose that was in samadhi was going off. I'd smell those jiaozi and my mouth would water. My hedonic expectation was vibrating. This was my mantra. And then my other expectation of disappointment was, because I was a junior monk, all the senior monks got to pick their food first. So I was looking how many of those jiaozi there were. And I was thinking, okay, that means when I get to it, I'm not even going to get the juice of the jiaozi. Then I would get all afflicted. It's like my meditation had just poof. So hedonic expectation is the feeling you get anticipating that reward that's coming, and that's a greater lure than actually getting it. This is what advertisement is effective about, because it creates and stimulates hedonic expectation. Some people will order things on Amazon with they have the hedonic expectation. They're driving home, I can't wait to get online and shop. Okay, and then they shop and say, whoa, order, put it on the cart. The hedonic expectation now is starting to peak. The next thing that happens is it'll be here in 4 to 5 business days. Oh, Prime, I can get it overnight. Do I want to pay the extra money to get it? But then if they get it overnight, they've done these studies, they really figured this out. You get it overnight, and then the hedonic expectation is down because now it's here. So now what they've discovered is people get the packages and they set them around their house and don't open them. Because then there's this kind of hedonic expectation all the time. It's there, but I'll increase, the expectation because I do it. As soon as I open it, it flattens out. And then there's adaptation, and then you have to order something again. So, having it wrapped and sitting, it's like the Christmas presents under the tree. As soon as those go there, and then you say, you can't open them until then, and it's kind of this rush that happens is what the Buddha described as being the fuel of desire that keeps us so off-centered. So we're either in hedonic expectation, or then we go to hedonic indulgence, and then we go to hedonic adaptation, and we keep going, and that's what he described as dukkha. As dissatisfaction, the wheel was driven by that. And so all I'm trying to say tonight, and I'll stop here because I'll go into this a little more, if you find this interesting, because it's really, to me, it's very interesting. When you try to stop that hedonic pattern, the first feelings you have is not joy and contentment and enlightenment, but a kind of discomfort because you're reversing that pattern. So the text I was going to use tonight that we'll get to next week will describe that psychological, emotional state of the beginning days or whatnot of your meditation practice, your cultivation practice, that seems unnatural at the beginning, but then, over time, turns into a great sense of liberation and joy, of riding easy and light harness. And in a sense, if we follow the ox woodcuts, you know the ox herder woodcuts from the Chan tradition? Anybody know this? Maybe I'll show those later, but it shows the little boy after trying to pull his mind back in, which is represented as the ox. And at the beginning, all he sees is a little tail around a corner. He doesn't even see the ox. That's his first glimpse. And then he gets the tail, but he can't, possibly. And it goes through stages, and he finally gets a rope, and he finally gets a harness. And one of the last scenes is he's just riding on top of the ox playing a flute. So once the ox has been totally subdued, but at the beginning, when he's trying to get it, it's sweat and dirt and running around, and it's frantic, and he doesn't have the strength. But after a while, that starts to pay off. So in the end, he's just sitting there riding at ease on top of the ox, which is then the return that comes from catching the mind, bringing it back, subduing it, and now you can really ride comfortably. So, I sent you those passages, right?
Yep.
So we got them for next week. Okay, so next week I'll just finish up with this, show you those passages because they're quite instructive, and I think they'll give you a kind of a theoretical grounding for when you begin this practice to deal with these states, understand how it works, and then we'll go back and finish up the text where we got last night. Okay, questions, comments, announcements? Yes?
So if there's different stages of the desire, is there a place that's the best or the most helpful to work on it? I mean, because you're not going to suppress them at any level, but then obviously once you've already started thinking about the pizza, it's harder.
Right. And of course, the disappointment is when you finally get the pizza, it won't be anything like you imagined. Unlike other things that we imagine in our desires. So your question is, what do you do when it arises?
Or how do you work on it at an earlier stage?
The first thing
It's
to,
not very visible.
well, the first thing probably to say in the process is once we get the theory down, we'll realize, and we should expect, that when we do the sitting, when we do the return, all these things, all these circuits that have been going out will continue to want to go out. And when you sit in meditation and bring your concentration, in a sense, you're putting a little bit of a harness, a curb around them, and they're going to want to push really hard. So the pizza's going to come up with even more fervor than if you're just sitting around watching the movie. You want a pizza? Sure, let's get one. Because you're just going. When you actually try to watch your mind and say, is it need or is it greed? You know, that kind of meditation, sort of, do I really need this or not? And you start to say, no, I'm actually leaving my ground out of a frantic nervousness. Just recognizing it already, Sarah, recognizing what's happening gives you a kind of strength. It's when you don't know why this is happening that you think, oh, my meditation's not working. This is like really not working. Actually, it's very effective because the outflow has been brought back a little and now there's a kind of pressure building up. And so as you bring that light back, it grows. Now, to you, it seems like it's almost like explosively growing, but that's because we've let it be scattered so long, our natural fullness feels strange to us. So if you just bring it back and then you're patient, you don't try to repress the pizza, you don't try to imagine it further, like, wow, those mushrooms, that they put the new, raw mushrooms on there, right? You don't go and think, and triple cheese, If you don't repress and don't enjoy, you just sort of watch it. And if you harness back, what's interesting is you watch, it all of a sudden just fades. Because it requires you attaching to it either through repressing or inflating. But if you don't do either, it actually, in its own, starts just, and you go, wow, that's interesting. If I just stay in this place, if I come back to this center, this thing rises and falls a bit. Now it'll come back again. But once you have that initial insight, that it relies on you attaching or repressing to it, otherwise it's not there, it's empty. Little bit by bit, you start to get this. And then that light that comes back is so powerfully enjoyable, so liberating, that it's actually better than the pizza. Now, I'm not against pizza, okay? Don't get me wrong. But I'm just describing sort of like, this is a psychological process the Buddha has mapped out very clearly. And I don't think it's ancient. I think what he's talking about is extremely present in our day-to-day existence. So next week we'll go into these passages and look at them a little further. Because this is what Han-chan's talking about. No announcements? Yes?
My son, David Wright, passed away 13 days ago.
Ah.
He used to come to this office sometimes. So if anyone knows Dylan, I have a little flyer. So I just asked him was passing.
I'm sorry for your loss, truly. Everyone here has, will, or is going through, and so you're not apart, even though it feels that way. It's probably one of the better places to come when something like that happens. Right, and people who want to add that to their transference tonight certainly can do that. That's what we're going to do now. Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding li san bao.